Okay, so this next problem starts out looking very normal, but then ends up really quite complicated and difficult. So what's going on here? Well, the real point of this particular example here is to point out that local preference really does trump AS path count. Now, of course, we know that local preference is above it in the BGP selection algorithm. However, normally when we're looking at local preference, we're imagining that the path counts are the same and that we're preferring one of the equal path counts. And of course, it really does trump AS path count completely. So let's just have a quick look at what's going on here. Upstream 2 didn't want R1 to be the entry point, so it's been prepending routes. Now, they could have set the multi-exit discriminator, but of course we could have ignored that as well. Or they could have got on the phone and they could have asked us. However, they've been prepending. This is as old as the hills. It goes on pretty much everywhere. Okay, so how are we set up? Well, this AS does have a link through to this AS, and so routes are appearing from router 5 and from router 1. Now we're on board. We also want to prefer router 8, so we're going to do two things, very standard. We're going to set the MED from R1 to 100, and this is going to make R1 unfavourable. So set protocol BGP group U2 metric out 100, default is 0, this becomes unfavourable. And the second thing we're going to do is set the local preference from R8. We're setting it in an unusual way. We are putting it on an export to the internal BGP. And the reason we're doing that is we've been asked that R8 would not be aware of its own local preference. So fair enough, set policy options, policy statements, to internal, local preference 200. We put that as an export on the IBGP. So we could consider this job done. The MED is set on one, the local preference on the other. However, what would happen if R8 became disconnected from upstream 1? Well, surprisingly, what happens now is, of course, this route gets lost, and now router 1 looks non-preferable compared to router 5. So router 5 really is a route that we're really not planning to use. It runs via upstream 3. It's our third choice, but of course now this seems preferable because this prepending is still in place. So how do we remove that prepending? Well, we're going to have to drop down the BGP path selection algorithm to where the AS path count isn't viewed, and so that's what we have to do. Set protocols BGP path selection AS path ignore, which is a really serious thing. Okay, so with this done, both router 5 and router 1 prefer their own externals rather than an external and then an internal, or an external and then an internal. And in doing so, both of the routes to this particular autonomous system can effectively go live. So this all looks complete, however it isn't. In testing, we discover that actually router 8 isn't being preferred, router 1 is still being preferred. This really does seem a bit surprising. So we go into router 1 and we have a look for the routes and we don't see them there. Are they being received from router 6? And router 6 doesn't have them either. So we go to router 4. Does router 4 have the routes? Yes, it does, but router 4 is not copying them to router 6. So anyway, we go back to router 8 and we have a look. And when we do show route receive protocol BGP and we put in upstream 1's neighbor, we discover that all of the routes are marked with a very unusual community, no export subconfed. Of course, we're running subconfederations. There's a community here telling router 4 not to advertise to router 6. So we have to delete that. So we build a policy, delete no export subconfed from BGP, then community, delete no export subconfed. And set protocols BGP group, it's the upstream 1, it's an import policy, and we're going to be deleting that. So that's a pretty nasty problem there, that this external peer, yes, they're prepending here, which has caused us some issue, but they're also setting this this community on all of the routes, saying no export from one subconfederation to the other.